We have a new directive on public sector information, which is going to enter into force within the next couple of months. This is very important because it's going to influence the cultural sector, and cultural institutions, once the directive is in force, are going to release their content under open licenses, and I think this is really important.
I think the area that I'm really interested in is the relationship between audiences and digital and the institution, and what the implications for the institution. Those implications are a voice of authority, issues of control, and issues of how to engage the public in a productive way through using the digital space.
So to digitize the archive is not only to make available conference readings, booklets, images of the exhibitions, catalogues, but to digitize the archive institutions is to make accessible all the process of how we work.
Art has always been about appropriation, about repetition, about using existing materials. Only today, with digital culture, things become immediately visible. So everything is transparent basically. And so what has changed today is really the consequences of art making.
My assumption is that the digitalization changes everything around movies, text, books, and the first thing to understand is that it's going to be a liquid form. It's a different aggregate state. And to understand this new liquid aggregate state of culture, it's important to see it as a process, not only as a product, and that's why I guess we should think about movies or books as we think about software, for example.
And so we can actually read these texts that at first are bland copyright infringements. We can read them as distinct messages about what people want or what people think about the world.
The perspective on the crowdsourcing industry, where there are millions of people working today, every day, with an average wage of up to $2 an hour in work environments like Mechanical Turk. My question then is how one can restrict such practice and what artists can do in that context.
There is hardly any cultural product today which is not being produced, circulated, and also, at least in part, received on a digital basis. All future artworks or all future art production will have to deal with this aspect of an inherent, at least implicit unfinishedness.
So it's not just about sharing ideas of software, it's actually creating common value. And so it's designing stuff that we can make. And so for me, the important thing is the connection between designing together, innovating together, but also actually making things in a new way and recreating a modality of creating value which is different from the one we have today.
And we're building alternatives for a new kind of economy built on developing more democracy through organizing the crowd and letting the crowd be able to choose the project that needs funding, that needs contribution from us, and with a very specific criteria. The project we want to help are projects that are providing collective returns, open DNA projects that think about like the global social sustainability.
Well, I think the political aspect is attached to any gesture. So by defining the gesture and by defining the implication of its resonance within a specific space, then you have something moving and vibrating. And so this applies to sound as it applies to other perspectives of relating with what we can call reality.
Okay, my name is Femke Snelting. I come from Brussels. I work with Constant, Foundation for Arts and Media. In this work, we found that there's a lot of work necessary to keep the future of shared digital practices open and interesting. For us, that goes into two directions. One is to, and this has all to do with somehow keeping a healthy habitat for experimental and artistic work. One part is clearly the state of the internet and how the exchange of files of data is made possible or made difficult through legislation and technical infrastructures. That's one part of the work. And the other is the kinds of tools we use to actually make this work and share it. It's really important to keep investing into the future of shared digital practices. Because work is extremely distributed, it will be very important to find new forms of solidarity and caretaking across borders and across disciplines, actually, which is not an easy thing to do.
So I'm here to convey a quite simple message: is stop losing your time with debates on piracy and immediately start addressing the real challenges of digital culture. How are we going to sustain a culture with many contributors?
We can follow up on an already established institution of public library and help the public library, which is under big threat today, by sharing the books and just fulfilling the dream of the librarians from the past, where the public library is defined as universal access to knowledge for every member of society.
It's not north and south, it's not rich and poor. It's also info rich and info poor.
I think it is important that we go back to the role of public cultural institutions and memory institutions and public cultural professionals, and reevaluate some of their core functions.
Welcome to Shared Digital Futures, a conference of World Information Institute, part of a larger ongoing European project.
Konrad already said this. This is not a particularly new theme, that digitization has a profound impact on the way we produce and conceive and use and reuse culture. Copyright still is a big theme, but not in the next 2 days. So I really want to focus on the practice of producing culture.
So the two arguments that I'm trying to put forward today is the first is that intellectual property rights actually gain increasing acceptance in contemporary China. And the argument that I focus on in a larger way is the fact of the creativity through copying. And what I'm saying here is that imitation, absorption, adaptation of existing material actually oftentimes triggers creativity.
The key feature is that we are able to duplicate content without costs and without degradation. The data, the content is separated from its carrier. The very nice German word Datenträger, we don't need it anymore because we can duplicate all content without any frontiers. I do not want to write on paper. I want to write a digital piece, and it's a very frustrating metaphor we have in our cultural history, because we are trained to this typewriter idea, and I think we can write books, fictional or non-fictional books, as we write code when we have three main ideas behind it. That we can do it collaborative together. That we can do it in versions, and in versions means before the first version is published, and that we have to think about it as a process.
A smart artist makes the machine do the work. Digitization has not fundamentally changed how art is operating. Is there repetition or is there insistence? I am inclined to believe there is no such thing as repetition. And really, how can there be? Stop using the word Google. Stop using the German word ich google das mal.
Some of the people can volunteer all the time, all of the people can volunteer some of the time, but not all of the people can volunteer all the time. So this is in a nutshell the problem of commons-based peer production as it exists today in the majority of the cases. But it's also very much a problem for everyone. It's also the nightmare of both communists and capitalists, because think about Facebook and Google. The companies who are most into this living off and enabling and empowering this type of dynamics, you can see how we have a little problem. So we have a platform, whether it's a search algorithm or a social media platform, which is absolutely valueless if there's nobody in there. The value, the people who produce the value are us, right? We, through our interactions, through our searches, we are creating the value of which these platforms then can realize that value in the exchange market. But think about it, a system where 100% of the value producers do not get any income is not very sustainable, right? So imagine a commons regulated by a license, protected by a foundation. This is already happening now in the free software world. They almost all have foundations that do not command and control the commons, but enable and enable infrastructure to continue to exist. And then you would have a whole set of co-ops that work with that commons. And once you have the solidarity around that commons, you could have lots of interesting things happening. For example, the open supply chain and open book accounting would be very normal decisions that such a network would take. But since the old left story, didn't work and wasn't appealing for most people, that how do we change today? And we need to change. And I thought peer-to-peer would be the leverage. And I called for a wish, the existence of a social movement which would, basically accept and be inspired by these peer-to-peer and commons principles. And I'm happy to say from my travels, I've been traveling 3 months, that social movement is there. All the people who invite me are doing something. An open food network. Whatever it is they're doing, a co-working center, a hackerspace, a fab lab, they're doing something new and different, inspired by peer-to-peer principles. So the social movement is there. Free software, open hardware, open design, hackerspaces, fab labs, seed commons, collaborative art spaces, they were all together in a festival and opening up their activities to the broader public. So this needs to happen more and more. People need, the people who are not with us, who don't know what's happening, need to know that this is happening.
So today we are all unemployed on probation, and the worry about career and jobs unites entire generations. Okay, but now let's talk about digital solidarity. So digital labor and crowdsourcing in particular set back the clock for organized labor to the second half of the 19th century when the 80-hour work week was the norm. Digital labor defeated hard-won achievements like minimum wage, employer-paid health insurance, paid vacation, and the abolition of child labor. No commitment, no care for the workers, just a superabundance of a global 24/7 workforce. Traditionally, they were the capitalist owners on the one side and the mass of workers on the other, frequently represented by a union. Today, they are anonymous individuals facing anonymous employers in some cases. Unions can't easily represent workers through firm-by-firm collective bargaining because workers have contracts with more than one company at a time. So one thing that would be interesting to pick up here also is that there are actually freelancers union in the United States, the fastest growing union. You have them in the UK, you have them in the Netherlands, and you have them in Ireland, but none in Germany, for example. I don't know about Austria. Today, we can either wait for the immaterial worker movement to materialize, or you can be part of the reshaping and invention of coalitions that would help to meet these collective needs. And one thing is clear: without outrage and conflict and protest, digital solidarity and mutual aid will not be able to make significant strides.
Yeah, we have the tools to do that. We have the tools to build more democracy, and new models, new economical models. The fact is, if we look at the way we're organized, the main people here are working into organizations, institutions, universities, maybe there's bankers, NGOs. They all work on that diagram, all right? We all agree on that. We have a real problem here, because basically all organizations, even NGOs, are working on that model. Basically, this is like cigarettes, right? Smoking can kill. Civic participation can kill an organization or an institution if they're not ready to digest the results of such a process and change the organization itself. What makes a project open? Open DNA. For free software, it's pretty clear. For NGOs, not that much. Basically, it's based on being replicable, reproducibility. So we can share code, documentation, good practices, methodologies, and it's better if we share it in an open format. All right, so open data will be the first thing to learn. Horizontality. Instead of living inside this organization, if I'm working on an NGO, it's better to create a new social enterprise, incorporating already the DNA model. So I start small, distributed, I start peer-to-peer. So it's time to create new structures. Very small, co-ops, but we need to. All right? Otherwise, it's not sustainable. And of course, to be open, you need to reinforce the commons. Giving the individual rewards, the book, in the hands of each individual backer doesn't make a community, doesn't build a community. All right? In Goethe, we tried, and we think the backers are as important as a project initiator, all right? Because the future project initiators, through the process of backing, by funding, you get to learn how to be open, and next time you be the one who asks for money. All right? So this solidarity and the fact that even the backers can organize themselves and create co-ops of why not consuming books or producing books, journalist co-ops. We need to see this arising from the crowd. We can't mobilize the crowd and use the opportunity to, again, get back to individual rewarding. All right? We have to let the government know, all right, that the same way they support the market, they have to support the commons, because we are part of the market. All right? We have prices on objects that are open source. Yeah? We have to insist on that. This was taboo 10 years ago. All right? And to get the things done. And this is the role of the foundation. We have to convince public partners and private stakeholders to be part of the game. But based on the criteria of the civic society, who has decided already which are the projects which are worth backing because they produce a social value.
There are more valuable contributors and more works of interest than before. Of course, you can think, well, most of this is crap, but in practice, well, could be, but I have tried to look at finding indirect estimates of how many people are what I call serious effort contributors. But I think I am on the safe side when I say that at least 2% of the Europeans aged more than 16 are serious effort contributors in some form of digital production or another. I believe such society-wide resource pooling for the commons is not just something which is valid for culture. It is actually, I believe, we need such schemes in about every domain of the new emerging commons, in particular the environment, in particular, let's say, sustaining the practices that are good for the environment, or sustaining, we need it in a way also for even for social common goods, such as the reducing the level of inequalities. So what I am going to do as a conclusion,
we get so much information that sometimes we get the idea that everything seems to be far away and very complicated. So maybe I'm an example of how it can actually work, very simple and very joyful. My true purpose of art is much more than creating and selling beautiful objects. It is a method of understanding, a way of sharing content, exercising my intelligence and imagination, coming closer to people, and leaving the world something relevant and something it can enjoy. The potential of the internet. So the combination of tools and users is a vast and growing digital commons, as mentioned before, and a pool of content that can be copied, distributed, edited, remixed, and built upon, and all within the copyright. I deeply believe that it's time for a change, that we need a collecting society that is really working in our interest and is adjusting to the digital age with all its challenges and opportunities. And so I'm happy to introduce the C3S, which is a cultural commons collecting society. And for me, it's the missing link between free culture and business. So the C3S is intended to become a non-exclusive collecting society to register musician works outside of traditional schemes, released under Creative Commons non-commercial licenses, but monetized in commercial use.
It is going to work. So actually, most of what I'm doing is an exercise in negative thinking about my own proposals, and it works. It works. It makes them better.
I don't want to get into micropolitics, but basically, it's a political response, which is built on the top of building an economy. So the interesting thing is building economical models as a political agenda.
We already had a panel yesterday on the subject of cultural production and specifically also artistic practice. We're pretty much interested in that also.
So one thing that needs to be done is somehow remake a connection between free software culture and design and art culture. Another thing that we see coming is now schools will probably not be able to pay for these kind of licenses. How we can help them reflow these funds into free software development and teaching, because I think that could be really a boost for these kind of tools that are usually really out of money. We have to sort of keep on making these kind of strange projects that rip our tools apart and make them exciting to be our own.
That through time, and out of these connections, other came in, and really fast and easily we start going to play in other countries, and I could say that it was even more active outside of Portugal. That inside of Portugal, so we were active in Porto and then not play almost nothing in Portugal and just going outside. And because of this dynamic that extended outside of it. So I could say that the landscape was for sure Porto within its own specificity, even the feel of the city, this kind of partial ruin that is Porto is like a big percentage of the buildings are empty and destroyed. Everything has this kind of a moss feeling, a kind of things are falling apart, and you feel that. And this somehow was a vision of a post-European apocalypse. It's like Europe never got there, and it was already over, and we didn't notice.
Situation is that maybe we have not the tools and we have not the machinery to understand that kind of complexity where we are here. And this is that they say that we are not going anymore to the library, we are not visiting anymore the museum, we are not going anymore to the university. We are living in a kind of, in a situation that is like to be physically inside, something that maybe technically is not an archive, but it's a kind of polluted landscape of noisy information situation. So,
interested in fiction, okay, how to do it today. If you do, you can hide from the society for 3 years and write a novel and then come in the media and say, yeah, I have a new piece. And then big propaganda around it and a big copyright around it, and you do like Michel Houellebecq, and then you get you are a super like single author genius. Or but the fabrication itself, it's a much different process. And what I'm interested in is how to make a difference. It's how to find ways to let's say write fiction in more real interaction with the media we live with today. Like there was the issue with the printing industry, the issue of the press, and now the issue of the web, and how to interact with this new situation. So it's maybe more like we say transmedia or hypermedia or whatever. I even don't like to use this term because it's still what interests me is not to put a categorization, it's to reach a political question, to reach a philosophical, metaphysical, ethical question, socially engage with people, learn things.
It's an effort of yourself to turn the prism and to look at it. It's always interpretative, so somehow it has a lot to do with motion, with the motion of yourself in time and in your own perspective of life and perception, and this is a everyday vibration into things, and so I feel that out of that, then you get aware of tools and intervals in between objects and things, properties of objects, their own cargo and the cargo of things and meanings of. But that's for me a second moment that follows immediately after this kind of drive, actually.
The essential idea of Odo is first connect with the audience. So first build a platform and build relationships with places where, with centers of attention where audiences are, to connect filmmakers with audiences. So first just say, where are these people, and how can we reach them and connect with them, and then give them a reason to buy something. We can very effectively distribute things to massive audiences, but what I want to say is, the problem we have is how do you make people want to see stuff? How do you take a film which is completely irrelevant to most people, an art film or a political film, and sort of, I guess this is what I'm saying, we have the machinery to compete with any distribution system that exists. We're better than anything that has previously existed in history, but we have no capacity to make people want to see things. It's really interesting, someone said to me, it's actually a risk for me and my time to watch a film, to watch an indie film. It's a risk because it's probably going to be rubbish, is what he said, and now you're asking me to pay what I want before I watch it? How would I know? In other words, not only will I not pay what I want before I want to watch it, but you're lucky if I watch it. So I thought we had to put it this way around, there's no choice, and that means we kind of need you to make some buy-in before. We'll see.
So it might be considered, to some extent, the ultimate, though unachievable, ideal of memory institutions, as well as, for instance, the knowledge commons, to make all knowledge accessible to everyone. You know, this would be the Aleph point, that we have one point where we can all go, and we have access to all knowledge, and it's there, and it's intelligible. We're talking about very large collections, and therefore, if you really realistically want to make that accessible for as many people as possible, this also costs quite a lot of money, and you can't avoid this question. So at that level, it does not scale. However, one thing that comes out very clearly is that commons-based approaches can greatly contribute to strengthening the effectiveness of public investments in public and open access cultural and knowledge resources, exactly because things get shared on a much wider basis. The effectiveness of investing in this initial moment of digitizing and making available becomes way, way more effective. Logic is to say these kind of large institutions and holdings should just be given the means to make this stuff fully freely available, so that people can take it and also put it in the market, because once they can put it in the market, you can get all kinds of really interesting and effective ways of further disseminating this material. So if you could take, but that's, you know, because of the realities that are out there, totally impossible at this moment, but if you could take that step to really make this, these public holdings fully freely available, you can create enormous market potentials there as well, by virtue of the fact that this stuff can be reused in any imaginable context, and not just for cultural purposes, but also for entertainment and merchandising and whatever. You would really open up a lot.
It's right. But public library as an institution is under the huge threat. The first one is that when it comes to digital books, they cannot get any book almost. So the largest publishers don't allow public libraries to buy the books. So we have two things. Public library will disappear. Also because the austerity measures. In UK, they are losing big time. Because, of course, the state doesn't have enough money, why we should support the public libraries. And also, if you imagine in 5 or 10 years, if they cannot buy any digital books, why you would support a public library which is not able to catch up with what's going on in the world. So in that sense, it is like doomed to fail. So we can, in like 20 years from now, we can say, oh, we had a great thing. It was called public library, but it really lasted from like 90-something or like end of 19th century, and then when you would expect that it will blossom because the digital networks are actually something where, if you like think of the public library, universal access to knowledge for every member of society, and then if you just try to imagine what is internet, why the fuck doesn't exist anymore? And that's what will happen. So,
story that I told, because the kind of practices that are labeled here as illegal, the whole point of that story is, of course, it should be legal. It should be just a standard and accepted practice. So the question, why aren't we doing it? Well, because it's not legal. Well, why don't we make it legal then? Right? But then you run into the realities of a very complicated situation where there are massive interests at play. You know, the ultimate solution is clearly a reform of copyright and by extension intellectual property rights regimes. So then it becomes a political question. That also came actually out, and it was really interesting to hear when we